The educational trend brought out by a number of groundbreaking researchers tells that one can be an effective facilitator of learning if one has a good working knowledge of the learner's development. So, according to the research, to be a good teacher or an educator, you must know and have a knowledge about your learners or help them, especially on how they will be able to develop their abilities and skills. So we have these theories related to learners' development. The first one is Freud's 3 components of personality and 5 psychosexual stages of development. The second one is from Erikson's 8 psychosocial stages of development, wherein we have trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame and doubt, initiative versus guilt, industry versus inferiority, identity versus role confusion, intimacy versus isolation, generativity versus stagnation, and ego integrity versus despair. Next, we have Piaget's 4 stages of cognitive development. We have the sensory motor, pre-operational stage, concrete operational stage, and formal operational stage. We have also the Kohlberg's 3-level and 6 substages of moral development. The fifth one is Vygotsky. We have on language and zone proximal development, wherein it is defined as the space between what a learner can do without assistance and what a learner can do with adult guidance or in collaboration with more capable peers. And lastly, the Bronfenbrenner's bioecological system. Freud emphasizes the 3 components that make up one's personality: the ID, ego, and superego. The ID is pleasure-centered, the ego is reality-centered, and the superego, which is related to the ego ideal or conscience. So the ID is the impulsive part of your personality that is driven by pleasure and repulsed by pain. The ego is the conscious part of your personality that mediates between the ID and the superego and makes decisions. And the superego is the judgmental and morally correct part of your personality. So the example of these 3 personality is that the ID is trying to get you to do things like eat cakes and not go to jogging. And the superego is trying to get you to make good decisions and be an upstanding person. So the ID and the superego are always fighting with each other, and the ego steps in between the two. Freud believes that an individual goes through 5 psychosexual stages of development. This includes the oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital stages. Each stages demands satisfaction of needs and failure to do so results in fixations. Erikson said, "Healthy children will not fear life if their elders have integrity enough not to fear death." He believed in the impact of significant others in the development of one's view of himself, life, and the world. So if we are going to interpret the quote of Erikson, parenting is included in developing a child by viewing their parents as their role model in every aspect of their life. So through trust and mistrust, a child can develop through the action of their parents. Like for instance, when a child play in a swing and where their parents put them on the top and start swinging, the fear of the child to fall is overcome by trust. However, when the fall really occurs, then the feeling of mistrust develops in the child subconsciously. He presented a very comprehensive of 8 psychosocial stages of development. It is Erikson who described the crisis that a person goes through, the maladaptation and malignancies that results from a failure to effectively resolve the crisis. and the virtue that emerges when balance and resolution of the crisis is attained. So here, it emphasizes the two crises, which are the maladaptation and the malignancy, wherein maladaptation involves too much positive aspect and too little negative aspect, like for instance, a person who trusts so much, while a malignancy involves too little of the positive and too much of the negative aspect, like for instance, a person who can trust others.
So these are the 8 stages of psychosocial development. So first, we have the trust versus mistrust. This first stage of Erikson's theory of psychosocial development occurs between birth and 1 year of age and is the most fundamental stage in life. The second one is autonomy versus shame and doubt. This second stage of Erikson's theory of psychosocial development takes place during early childhood and is focused on children developing a greater sense of personal control. The third one is initiative versus guilt. This third stage of psychosocial development takes place during the preschool years. At this point in psychosocial development, children begin to assert their power and control over the world through directing play and other social interactions. The fourth one is industry versus inferiority. This fourth psychosocial stage takes place during the early school years from approximately ages 5 to 11. Through social interactions, children begin to develop a sense of pride in their accomplishments and abilities. The fifth psychosocial development is identity versus role confusion. This psychosocial stage takes place during the often turbulent teenage years. This stage plays an essential role in the developing a sense of personal identity, which will continue to influence behavior and development for the rest of a person's life. The sixth stage of psychosocial development is intimacy versus isolation. Young adults need to form intimate, loving relationships with other people. Success leads to strong relationships, while failure results in loneliness and isolation. The seventh one is generativity versus stagnation. Adults need to create or nurture things that will outlast them, often by having children or creating a positive change that benefits other people. The last stage of psychosocial development is ego integrity versus despair. This final psychosocial stage occurs during old age and is focused on reflecting back on life. At this point in development, people look back on the events of their lives and determine if they are happy with the life that they lived or if they regret the things they did or didn't do.
Piaget said the principal goal of education in the schools should be creating men and women who are capable of doing new things, not simply repeating what other generations have done. A little background for Piaget. He was a Swiss developmental psychologist and a genetic epistemologist. Through his studies of his own 3 children, Piaget developed a theory of cognitive development that described a series of stages of intellectual development that children go through as they mature. Prior to Piaget, people tended to think of children as simply small versions of adults. So, through his work, he introduced the idea that children's thinking was fundamentally different than of adults. So, therefore, the quotation of Piaget said that the goal of education must explore new things that would be beneficial to the learners. Since we are in the 21st century, we gathered different kind of effective school environment, especially in technology. So therefore, if the teacher manage it well, we can produce creative, inventive, and discoverers learners. He described the 4 stages of cognitive development. Firstly, number 1, sensory motor, number 2, pre-operational, number 3, concrete operational, number 4, formal operational stages. So each has characteristic way of thinking and perceiving that shows how one's cognitive abilities develop. Let us have a brief discussion about this theory. So in sensory motor stage, he described the first 2 years of life as being a child is in the process of receiving sensory input from their bodies and their environment vision, like vision, hearing, taste, touch, and such, to produce a motor response. So in this stage, the child is mastering his own innate physical reflexes and extending them into pleasurable or interesting actions. The second one is pre-operational stage. So this stage begins around age 2 as children start to talk and lasts until approximately age 7. So during this stage, children begin to engage in symbolic play and learn to manipulate symbols. The third one is concrete operational stage. So the child is now mature enough to use logical thought or operations but can only apply logic to physical objects. Lastly is formal operational stage. So this final stage, the child already learns how to manipulate abstract ideas, make hypotheses, and see the implications of his own thinking and of others. We can now relate the theory of Piaget on how helpful it is in education. So, by using Piaget theory in the classroom, teachers and students benefit in several ways. Teachers develop a better understanding of their students' thinking. They can also align their teaching strategies with their students' cognitive level, such as motivational set, modeling, or doing an assignments. Kohlberg said that the right action tends to define in terms of general individual rights and standards that have been critically examined and agreed upon the whole society. So my understanding in the quotation is that in our society, we have different rules and regulations, whether it is constitutionally and democratically agreed upon. So right action is a matter of personal values and opinions. Now, an action, belief, or practice is morally good if it has been created through fair democratic processes that respect the rights of the people affected. So, in addition, people involved from the idea of being good into what would be the right thing to do. They seek to create morals and values for a good society instead of maintaining the society for the sake of doing so. Okay, let's proceed to the moral stages proposed by Lawrence Kohlberg. He proposed the 3 levels of moral development: the pre-conventional level, conventional level, and post-conventional level. Under pre-conventional, we have the stage 1, avoiding punishment, and stage 2, aiming at a reward. In conventional level, we have the stage 3 and 4, the good boy and good girl attitude. Stage 4, loyalty to law and order. And under post-conventional level, we have the stage 5 and 6, the justice and the spirit of the law, and also we can call it social contract. And the stage 6 is the universal principles of ethics. I will not be able to discuss it all since we tackled this already in our ethics subject last year. However, we'll focus on the stage 5 of moral development, which is the social contract, and it is under the post-conventional level since the quotation is relevant to it. The relevance of the moral stages to the education is that if the teachers will teach children at an early age the moral approaches or moral development such as humility, courage, compassion, it will build their character as a person because as we know that the children spends incredible amount in school, it is essential as a future teacher to start teaching them moral values while they are still children. Vygotsky said that the teacher must orient his work on yesterday's development in the child but on tomorrow's. Vygotsky emphasized the role of social interaction in learning and development. Scaffolding is the systematic manner of providing assistance to the learner that helps the learner to effectively acquire a skill. Vygotsky has this social development theory. In that theory, he argues that learning is preceded by social interaction, which make consciousness and cognition the product of socialization and social behavior. So it simply means that educators play a vital role in the teaching learning process based on how they interact with their students. He believed that guidance from a more knowledgeable other would lead a learner to a higher level of performance than if he were alone. The higher level of performance then eventually becomes the learner's actual performance when he works independently in the future. So therefore, in order to produce learners who can think on their feet, I think it is necessary to stress out the importance of teachers who can develop higher order thinking skills of learners. So teacher tasks are not limited to the transmission of learning alone. They are also tasked to inculcate necessary life skills that can be used by learners future-wise. So we must always remember that the purpose of education is to help learners become logical, rational, wise, and adaptable. And we cannot achieve this the moment we fail to recognize that today's learning might be obsolete. The teaching learning process must always be innovative and student-centered. As a future educator, I believe that learning anytime is achievable as long as the learner knows how to learn. Bronfenbrenner's model, also known as the bioecological systems theory, presents child development within the context of relationship systems that comprise the child's environment. The model is composed of microsystem, mesosystem, exosystem, macrosystem, and the chronosystem. Let's have a brief discussion about this theory. So here, it is the theory of Yuri Bronfenbrenner, wherein he argued that the child development is a complex system of relationship affected by multiple levels of the surroundings. Example, the cultural values, the law, and the custom. So, he said that if we need to study the child development, we must look not only at the child and her immediate environment, but also at the interaction of the larger environment as well. Bronfenbrenner divided a person's environment into 5 different systems. First is microsystem, mesosystem, the exosystem, the macrosystem, and the chronosystem. The microsystem is the immediate environment in which the child lives.
The mesosystem is a combination of 2 or more microsystems. For example, a child mesosystem might be home and the school. It is called connection because
It affects the child directly. In this stage, the mesosystem is the child will be able to actively engage and socialize with others. The third one is the exosystem, the indirect environment. So it means that exosystem is outside of the daily activities of a child, but still have an effect on the individual. Example of exosystem is the workplace or work of the parent of a child. The fourth one is the macrosystem. It is the social and cultural values, wherein it is the outermost or the macro layer of the bioecological model. So it encompasses the cultural and societal beliefs, decisions, and actions which influence an individual child's development. This might include, for example, the child's religious influences. The fifth and final level of Bronfenbrenner's ecological system theory is known as the chronosystem. So this system consists of all the environmental changes that occur over the lifetime, which influence development, including major life transitions and historical events. The term bioecological points out that a child's own biological makeup impacts on his or her development. The child's growing and developing body and the interplay between his or her immediate family or community environment and the societal landscape fuel and steer his or her development. Changes or conflict in any one layer will ripple throughout other layers. To study a child development, then, we must look not only at the child and his or her environment, but also at the larger environment with which the child interacts. Bronfenbrenner's ecological system theory is one of the most accepted explanations regarding the influence of social environments on human development. So this theory argues that the environment you grow up in affects every facet of your life. Bronfenbrenner explained that the child's biological and environment has a large impact on his or her learning development. Therefore, if the child grew in a family in which he or she may have deficiency in physical and emotional, it may affect his learning process. Thus, as the child pertains as teachers, as their second mother and father, we should check them up regularly because there might be a reason why they have poor performance in school. We should be ethical, like we shouldn't tell them bad remarks if they got low scores or didn't answer our question correctly. There is many intervention that may apply in such.